Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So, in one of the previous lore videos that I made, I was talking about the goddess Lolth, and within that video there was a very important goddess that I briefly mentioned, and that goddess is Eilistraee. She's often described as a beautiful drow woman with a willowy stature, with obsidian dark skin and hair that shines like the light of the moon. She's very rarely depicted clothed, and for many of her followers it's also believed that they do many of their ceremonies unclad as well. So as I go over the course of this video drawing out this time-lapse for everyone, just note, I'm really trying to not get my channel demonetized. Keep that in mind. So anyways, diving into Eilistraee's lore, she's seen to be a benevolent goddess of the drow. She's a goddess of rebellion, of the moon and light, of song, swordsmanship, dance, beauty, and love. And a majority of her agenda is all about finding ways to aid the drow and pull them out of darkness and into the light. However, that lore needs to be changed quite a bit actually. So, in recent years, the lore of the drow have actually changed to a point where Eilistraee's continuing story should be altered. But for some reason, it is not. Allow me to explain. As I was previously saying about what things fit within Eilistraee's domain, previously as we look through Eilistraee's lore, it stated that during the Divine Wars, when Lolth/Eilistraee tried to kill Corellin, Eilistraee failed and was banished, and Eilistraee decided to join her mother in banishment. She willingly left the Seldrun, the Elven Pantheon, in order to join the Drow Pantheon because she knew that the Drow would need a guiding light. And while most drow deities were simply aiming to usurp, and I say that is probably one of the most tame ways as I can, usurp one another for power's sake, Eilistraee had other plans. She wanted her followers to return to the surface, live in peace and bask in the sun and moonlight. She saw the horrors that her mother would put the inhabitants of the Underdark through, and instead wanted to serve as a guiding light and ally to the drow. And mind you, as she did this, she was opposed by every single other god or goddess within the Dark Seldrun. Everyone but her wanted to keep the drow in the dark, except for her, and she was deathly serious when it came to liberating the drow. Other gods, such as her siblings, simply wanted to overthrow their mother Lolth or each other and stand atop of the Underdark and then the world. But Eilistraee was different. That wasn't her immediate goal, or even anywhere within her roster of goals. She wanted the drow to live in peace, not just with themselves, but with all the other races. She did everything in her power to bring this about. Despite the anguish of her origin, as well as the continued difficulty she faces on a daily basis, she still aims to just spread love and happiness wherever she goes. She learned to overcome her sadness by focusing on and cherishing the beauty around her. Even unexpected places like the Underdark have joy and beauty. She would take joy in finding the moments of inspiration in artists and craftsmen, the tender moments of genuine care and affection between lovers, people singing and dancing. She aided the needy, the outcasts, and the different within the drow society. Unlike other gods who use their influence to duke it out amongst themselves in massive battles or by slowly working to undermine them with calculated strategy, Eilistraee's fight is continuous, day by day. Her fight is by choosing, preserving, and protecting peace in the small and beautiful moments of life. And overall, this is what she stood for in her old lore. And a lot of this too is really about fighting Lolth, freeing the drow from the tyranny of the Underdark and giving them a better life. However, Wizards of the Coast has been tirelessly working to fix the more racist implications of certain aspects of their lore and world building. Which I want to preface, that is a good step. But hold on. And while a lot of these changes are good, weirdly enough, they haven't really affected Eilistraee, but they should. A few years back, Wizards had the Summer of Drizzt. And now this was an event that really just highlighted Drizzt Do'Urden in the lore and mythos of D&D. Drizzt is a drow ranger and a very large figure. However, a good chunk of his writing and his character was sort of the shtick that he was a quote-unquote good drow. You know, that he was one of the good minority from a race that was inherently evil? Dritzt's objective was one about rebelling against the Drow society, liberating his people, and overcoming Lolth's pressures, both on him and his people. And however, with the Summer of Dritzt, they actually retconned a lot of this old lore. And one of the big changes actually involved showing non-evil Drow societies within the lore. And now, to summarize some of this lore, they say that when Lolth was banished, the Drow that followed Lolth into the Underdark became the Uda Drow, but then two offshoot groups didn't follow her, the Loren Drow and the Aven Drow. Wizards did this to show Drow as a benevolent race, or at least showing them as a race that has any spectrum of morality and alignment, just as any other race would potentially have. And first of all, kudos to Wizards. This was a step in the right direction, and I'm really glad that they did this overall. The problems of making a character in a race be the good minority implies that the rest of the race is bad, and that these stereotypes, however harmful about Drow, are true, except for when it comes to Dritzt, because he broke the mold. So, is bad. Having stuff like that is bad. Trying to improve it is good. However, I just wish that they went the full way with it. When you retcon a world's lore, it actually greatly affects so many different aspects that sometimes you don't always consider at the time. And Eilistraee's entire shtick was that she was the good Drow goddess. And in a similar way to Dritzt, they are very similar to one another. Eilistraee too was also kind of described as the good one of the bunch, especially too if you look at the Dark Seldarin and what is running about there. But if you take so much time to showcase Drow in this new light, you change a lot of the pantheons within the Drow. When it comes to things in D&D, or it comes to just the overall official writing of the worlds, gods can play a very heavy part on the world building, and so do the races. And so if you change one, you kind of have to change the other, or at least alter or improve upon it slightly. Despite these lore changes with the good aligned Drow societies, we really don't see anything acknowledging Eilistraee or any new updates to her at all. And you might be thinking, okay, well, Smiles, you're kind of obsessing about this, but someone has to. I've covered a few different gods and their lore on this channel already, and trust me when I say that it is a bigger deal than it really seems. Typically, certain gods wouldn't really be affected by another society being formed that has a different type of alignment. A lot of the gods that I've covered don't really have domains that focus on things like that. Sylvanas was a god of nature, Lolth is a god of the Drow. Even Krellin is just a god of elves. Gods that cover concepts like nature, virtues, vices, a specific race. And only when the presence of those aspects waxes or wanes does that deity start to be affected. However, when you take something like an entire race and then just decide that their lore is going to be different, that does have massive implications to a pantheon regarding that race. And for example, as I mentioned before, we've covered the power structures of the deities. The larger their portfolio, the stronger the god. The better the stuff in that portfolio is doing, the better the deity is doing. Eilistraee was a powerful goddess in her own right, covering good aligned Drow as well as benevolent virtues shown within Drow society. However, that was when goodness and light were things that were sheltered and not really seen too boldly in Drow societies, namely the Underdark, which was previously the only place you could find Drow most of the time. That was when the Drow were oppressed and terrorized by a theocratical matriarchy that followed an evil centaur spider lady. Now, the Drow showcase traits and features, on average, that are much better aligned with Eilistraee's domain, and thus, it should increase her followers, which would drastically increase her domain and maybe even make her pose as more of a threat to Lolth. And now granted, this is only speculation. As we covered in Lolth's video, Lolth is a goddess of all Drow, just as Krellin is a god of all elves. So this subset makes her overall have a smaller domain than Lolth, hence the power imbalance. However, even if there wasn't a single evil Drow for the rest of the race, and there were only good aligned Drow, this would technically make Eilistraee just as strong as Lolth, since technically their portfolios would be the same size. Lolth cannot get weaker as long as there are Drow that are increasing in number and population as a race. Eilistraee can only become more powerful if there are more good, more virtuous Drow, within the race. And also to clarify, with the Summer of Drizzt, we still have Drow in the Underdark that are reverently worshipping Lolth. She has a lot of power, and will continue to have a lot of power, as I just clarified. As long as the Drow are still hanging out, Lolth will be there. But when you showcase these new Drow societies that don't actively want to subjugate every other living creature in the name of a giant spider lady, it does change a lot of the lore. But we don't see how any of this affects Eilistraee. It's not mentioned anywhere. With the new changes to Drow lore, there's literally no mention of Eilistraee, her new influence, her new stories, her new place in these societies, anything. We only have some very brief implications like, yeah, maybe she'd be here doing her thing. And as I was saying before, this is often a massive problem with retconning that I feel like frequently gets overlooked. When lore is changed, any and all subsequent or attached lore, however distant, then becomes something that needs to be fixed within the story. And with this, there's too many aspects of new Drow lore that aren't answered. What does Eilistraee do now that a chunk of Drow are actually safe and good, or at least neutrally aligned? Has this changed her tactics and overall goal? And if so, how? And even too, how is she changing to accommodate these goals? Is Eilistraee really becoming more powerful? What happened to the other deities within the Dark Seldarin? And with the rise of good Drow societies, did this create other good aligned Drow deities? We can assume that we have the answers to some of these questions, and of course, as DMs, we always have the ability to hand wave and decide that we can do whatever we want with the lore in our games. But for the population of DMs that follow the lore to the T, it does seem like some things are just kinda missing. And regardless, despite some of the lore holes, I do really like what they've done and are doing to the Drow. I do think it would be cool if we could see more of the effects of these changes on the Pantheon, but that's information we might never get confirmed. But regardless, that is all the time that I have today for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning about Eilistraee, and if you did, then please like and subscribe for even more D&D content and ideas. And even too, if you have any other sort of gods, or any just creatures, or just things in lore that you'd want me to cover on the channel, let me know in the comments below. And in the meantime, keep smiling, keep scheming, and I'll see all of you next time.